have we failed? With a lot of sadness, with a lot of reluctance, with a lot of hesitation, I think the short answer to the question today would be almost. Why do we say that? In a few days' time, it will be almost 3 months since we woke up to the rude, crude, barbaric event that you all know about. A 31-year-old doctor in her place of work was ruthlessly raped and murdered. A lot of water has gone down the Hooghly since. And where have we landed? Where has all these things led us to as we discuss this in early November? Let us focus the light on us the doctors, who led protests, who led movement, who were summoned by the police, who, holding the hands of the juniors of the community, led perhaps one of the most remarkable movements that independent India has seen. Because it was a group of doctors who was not leading a movement wanting more money. It was not a group of doctors who were in a protest to pay rise for their own personal service conditions, facilities, etc. In late 2023 and early 2024, there were 2 massive healthcare protests. One was in United Kingdom, where about 25 to 30,000 junior doctors of the National Health Service led a series of strikes in England. What were the strikes about? The strikes were about the junior doctors who were denied a pay increment for more than 2 years, etc. So they were basically wanting a 30% pay increment. They had a series of strikes. Inevitably, the National Health Service, which is like a single service provider in the United Kingdom, was completely derailed for the 6 or 7 strikes they had. And ultimately, they sat down with their health minister and came to some interim agreement. Was there a political flavor to it? Yes, there was. Because it was the time when it was in the time of the Conservative government, and it was believed that the Labour was adding fuel to the fire, and as soon as it looked that Labour is going to succeed the Conservatives, somehow the ferociousness, the anger in the protest got a little bit muted and silenced. A little later, 75,000 healthcare workers in and around San Diego, United States, again they rose up and protest. And once again the protest was to do with their pay, their salaries, the various nitty-gritties of their service condition, and after derailing the healthcare service in and around their states and cities, some agreement was led. But this was so different. This was a professionals who so far has been divided, so far who've been politically divided, ideologically divided into the private sector and the public sector, who could never see eye to eye in any matter underneath the sun, who in a sense of outrage, in a sense of indignation had come together. Sadly, as the movement went on, perhaps inevitably, like anything in India, and more so in Bengal, the political possessiveness of this movement made itself more and more obvious. There was a time in the movement when the junior doctors did 2 very important landmark happenings in this movement. One was when the junior doctors went and literally swarmed the campus of the health department. There is a separate campus in Kolkata called Swasthya Bhavan. They stayed put over there and went on a list of charter of demands, which was a 5-point demand at that stage. And at that stage, the strength of the movement was probably at its pinnacle, at its peak. And something bizarre happened. And what happened at this stage was, as the demands were being pressed with the utmost strength and angst, what was happening is repeatedly the participants of this Swasthya Bhavan movement went on shouting go back slogans. And once that was happening, there was go back slogans. People from the Congress who was visiting the campus, n number of people from the BJP who tried to express their sympathy, allegedly apolitically. And similarly, when people who were left-leaning personalities who were talking, lecturing, giving speeches, I believe there was no go-back slogan against them. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong at all with people of left-leaning ideologies, political parties, fringe parties, whatever, being a part of the movement. It was and it should have stayed as an all-encompassing movement. But at the crescendo of the movement, there was a visual identification. There was a visual identification with a political bloc. And that, was it a point of strength or weakness? To me, that was a point of weakness. And at that stage, what I think to be a tactical blunder, the tactical blunder at that stage was that when the juniors were in the health campus with their list of demands, they should have structured the epicenter of this movement into a group of doctors who were with the government health service, a larger committee, a larger group of doctors who could speak out. Because what were the demands about? Yes, the demands were about for the justice for this poor girl. Along with it, the demands was to sanitize and cleanse all the nefarious activities happening in the hospital, in medical education, in the examination system. So it wasn't something that was focused completely and exclusively for the junior doctors. So there needed to be an identity, there needed to be an identified steering group, a think tank, a committee of both the seniors and the juniors who could credibly and strongly put forward a list of demands to the government. So as these two things were happening to the movement, one, the identification with a certain political bloc, and secondly, what appeared to be an over-possessiveness of the junior group. The government, in its tactical approach to this movement, seemed to be getting its act together, at least getting its act together tactically. The whole genesis, if you look at the larger background, that why was the health service in chaos? Why were these 4 or 5 mandarins, extra-constitutional people who claimed their proximity to the chief minister, who claimed their proximity to the center of power in Trinamool, who were working as the extra-constitutional center of power in the healthcare system? This was a problem that lied at the door. The accountability was with the TMC. The accountability to a large extent was with the Chief Minister. See, in realization of the fact that it was difficult for her or for her party to go into an offensive, they have to be given credit for getting their house together, for getting their tactics together, and in a series of efforts, they were able to get back the control of an agitation which seemed to be running away from them. The Chief Minister appeared at the Swasthya Bhavan campus. I think that was largely unexpected. There was these attempts for her to meet the junior doctors. There was a meeting of some description at her residence. It was denied that you are not going to have live streaming at that stage. And from that meeting, it appeared as if that the group of junior doctors came back with more questions than answers. And a few days after that was, at least what I think, was a very emotive, was very compelling, was a supercharged situation of a hunger strike. 6, 7, 8 of these youngsters undertook a hunger strike till their list of demands, which was a 10-point demand at this stage, were fulfilled. As emotive as it was, as supercharged as it was very difficult for people even to absorb the situation, that these youngsters who were completely sincere, who were completely identified with the problems, and once again, not one of the problem was to do with their personal benefits, had embarked on a hunger strike, which in some ways was another tactical blunder, because this was a hunger strike till death. Is it ever imaginable that a group of doctors will allow their youngsters to become tremendously sick, because beyond 4 or 5 days of starvation, our entire physiology, our entire metabolic features of the body will be turned upside down? And that happened. Some of these youngsters, their blood reports, their urine reports were coming to be alarming, and they had to be admitted to the hospital. So what was perhaps a very strong expression of sincerity started to be ridiculed. Because it was never conceivable, it was never possible. This is like a form of protest which happened. It's more in the southern states. Then in your angst and anger, you will come out and pour kerosene over yourself and set yourself on fire. So the hunger strike was perhaps the last bullet fired too soon. And as this was happening, the political identification, or if you are very harsh, you would say, the political adulteration of the movement, which was hitherto identified as a consolidated movement across party lines, was almost established. And not only the group of doctors, the society, the people of every city of the state had repeatedly responded in a way that we have never seen. We were asking ourselves, was Rabindranath ever able to evoke that response when he led the Bongo Bongo campaign of 1905? When we asked people who are old enough to recall that the 1942 Quit India movement, did it evoke a similar response in our community? The answer was silence. So perhaps it did not. But in this the weighing scales were tipping not in the favor of the doctors during the hunger strike moment. And the government, led by the chief minister, it has to be appreciated, took up a stance, took up a posture, took an approach to problem solution, which is perhaps unseen in the history of Indian democracy for a good part of 77 years. The government here was a part of the problem. And realizing that they are on the defensive, and they are terribly on the defensive, the chief minister took up an attitude of magnanimity, of benefaction. And she was helped with the fact that she was approaching it with a positive, patronizing attitude, and she was speaking forever to a group of youngsters. She was like an elder of the family addressing the youngsters. And in the meetings, the first meeting was not witnessed by anybody. But when, and I think it was 21st of October, the second meeting happened. And without any kind of hanky-panky, it was straight away live streamed. So the spontaneous live streaming, the kind of patience, fortitude that Mamata Banerjee displayed for, it was supposed to be 45 minutes, went on for good part of 2 hours. People who are cynical, people who are forever finding fault with Mamata Banerjee will obviously come out and say the problem is her making, so she had no option to do that. Fair enough. Did we see this kind of an approach when the CPIM had their backs to the wall during the Singur movement? Never. Did you ever see this approach to a burning issue when the BJP was struggling like hell to come to terms with the farmers' movement? Not that I recall. So by this time, the chief minister was already at the control of this agitation. She went on, she accepted in principle. Most of the demands were sort of accepted, timelines had to be worked out, and the people who were glued onto the television watching the 21st of October meeting were terribly annoyed, and they were annoyed because the junior doctors went on and on about the minutiae of various committees. The committees were very important. But the issue of the committees, the meeting should have discussed the broad points of principle, and the rest of the minutiae should have been recorded in the agenda. A timeline would have been set up when the junior doctors would discuss these minute details with the health bureaucracy at a later date. It is no criticism, it is a reassessment. The preoccupation with removing of the health secretary, that was a completely missed opportunity, not needed. And even the effort, the junior doctors, when they went to Lal Bazar and they were insistent on removing the police commissioner, fair enough, the police commissioner had his shares of trouble, has his shares of problems, has his share of incompetency in gathering evidence. Either it was an error or omission or commission or both. But just look at it. The person who replaced the police commissioner was denying them even water, electricity, and the minimum provisions they required to conduct their protest from central Calcutta. So focusing excessively on personalities was perhaps not what was required. Excessive possession of the movement by the junior doctors, in my mind, backfired. They had to consolidate the central command of the movement with the proper involvement of the seniors. And the inevitability of political identification or political adulteration of a movement which had a wholesale participation of the community certainly was a same-side goal. But perhaps this is inevitable in our society, in our condition. It is inevitable in India, and more so in Bengal, where our life, living, economy, earning is terribly dependent upon whatever happens in the government circles, because our life and living, the economy, the bread earning capability, a people's sense of livelihood and living outside of the government ecosystem is getting weaker and weaker by the day. Will we be able to resurrect this movement? Will we be able to restore the apparent neutrality of the movement? Will it be possible to reconstitute the central command of the movement, whereby the government is systematically engaged with a think tank which is a combination of both juniors and seniors from the government sector. These are very critical questions. And if that does not happen soon, I think this would be a rivulet which would dry up in the sands of politics. And this will probably happen sooner rather than later. It is crucial for us to realize at this stage that unlike the political agenda, it was the most powerful of movement. But the agenda of the movement was not to unseat a government. The agenda of the movement, as identified by the BJP of Bengal, the BJP of Bengal was behaving like a group of children with attention deficit disorder. For 5 days they would sympathize for the movement, for the next 5 days they would be critical of the movement. And they were in an unholy hurry because, like potassium permanganate in the lab, which catalyzes the manufacturing of oxygen, they were trying to use the junior doctors as their catalyst to unseat a government, something they have been repeatedly unsuccessful in doing. And in Bengal, what the BJP has to realize, that their sense of tactics and strategy has to be a lot more mature. And BJP is constantly on a protest mode. They have very little emotion. They have very little empathy. So without sympathy, without empathy, without buying into the tonality of the movement, if you are constantly on a high-pitched protest mode, I do not think the people automatically identify with you. The people are still impatient about the fact, justice for this unfortunate girl. Justice for this unfortunate girl depends on 3 things. It depends on what the CBI has been able to extract from the interrogation of the 2 people in custody, or rather 3 of them. The civic volunteer Sandeep Ghosh, the Afan Terrible, the principal, and the police OC who's with the CBI. The information CBI has been extracted from them. Justice for Abhaya depends on her colleagues in Arjikor, how strong, how detailed has been their deposition to the CBI to give them the circumstantial evidence. And we regret, but the truth of the matter is, justice also depends on the political will or the intention, because the CBI has a lot of competency, but the volume control knob of the CBI lies elsewhere. And we have seen, with a lot of sadness, we have to say again and again, that taking the monitoring of this investigation away from the High Court of Calcutta to the Supreme Court was perhaps an act of cunning. It was not an act of compassion. It did not even add 1 ounce of value to the process what was going on. And when the legacy of Justice Chandrachud will be written, probably there will be more questions than answers as far as Arjikor will be concerned. And it is very wrong for us to give the impression to the people that the louder you shout, faster is the justice. Even for an unfortunate, emotional Bengali, this has to be affected, that the speed or quality of justice has nothing to do with it. It will depend, A, on the political will, B, on the strength of evidence that the CBI has gathered, and let us brace ourselves for the fact that verdicts may or may not be popular. We come to a point, friends, when again and again we have to emphasize that the people, the doctors, the entire ecosystem around us protested against a barbaric act, recognized that the health system in Bengal had so much wrong with it. And the idea was to seek justice, the idea was to have the very important imperative corrections in the healthcare system. And some of it can be salvaged. These doctors, who've really given precious times of their lives, they need to put the thinking caps on. They need to resist the inevitable temptation of getting identified with political blocs. They need to take the society as a whole and a medical community as a whole along with them. They are reformers. They are not hijackers. And this attitude has to be structured. It is not something that will come out of a televised streamed meeting in a matter of 120 minutes. It has to be the government healthcare system meeting the doctors at periodic intervals based on an agenda that will get us at least some way down the path we wanted to walk. If we give in to the political temptations inevitably, I think this goal that these youngsters set for themselves will recede far further and further away. As we speak, we already have 3 to 4 splinters doctors group who are at constant loggerheads with one another. And unless somebody somewhere is able to reconsolidate, is able to reformulate, and is able to redirect the true objective of what is happening, I think we will have to really concede to the point, we tried, we achieved something, but perhaps there was more to do. We live in hope. Thank you.